chickpea pasta, it's fucking terrible. It's the most disgusting substitution. Don't buy it. It's gross. I'm still eating it, but it's gross.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Eliot.
Back from the grave at 7,500 feet elevation, it's me, Kyle Perkins. Hello. Long time no here.
The single greatest role player of our generation.
It's not the first time I've heard that, but it's so nice of you to have me on the show.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. Today, as has already been alluded to, we are going to be talking about how to get better at role-playing. I said a few moments ago before we actually started the podcast, but I feel like we've got a really good team for talking about this today because, KP, you are one of the people that I would consider to be the strongest role players that I've ever played with. And Eliot, every time the topic comes up, you talk about how you wish you were a better role player. I don't think you're a terrible role player, but it's something you always, like, it's the thing I know you most for saying about role-playing when we're not on this podcast.
It's a ruse. That's my whole shtick, baby. Self-deprecation wins you friends and favors.
Isn't that the truth? And also accolades as the best role player of our generation, apparently. Eliot, I think there's two kinds of people that self-identify as bad role players. And there's the kind that's actually a good role player and that just self-deprecates or maybe doesn't have, like, I don't know, the confidence or awareness, and that is generally a wonderful person to have in your game. And then there's the person that's like, yeah, I'm a terrible role player. And then as a result, they don't try, they don't care, they don't do any attempt at acting like a character or even a character class. And those people suck. And this podcast is not for you. Stop listening. Get that fuck out.
See, that's funny because, like, I think one of the many things this podcast is going to bring to my life today is sending me down a spiral of like self-reflective, like, darkness, because I have absolutely no self-awareness that I self-describe as a bad role player. So I'm like, oh, do I paint that horrible of a picture to myself that's the lasting impression I give to people?
Just for clarification, no, you don't claim you're a bad role player. The thing I've heard you say more than anything else off of the podcast is, I wish I were better.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think now so to get into the topic a little bit, just maybe for my sake too, we can maybe pull a little disambiguity out. Let me throw a question out there because I think this relates. So one thing that is 100% true, especially whenever we get into like the meta stuff on this podcast, talking about role playing, is like, though I've had as long a relationship with gaming as anybody, you know, I've played since I was a child, and I'm not anywhere close to a child anymore. 20 years. But like the games that I've played, my actual experience of the variety of role-playing games out there is very limited. I mainly am a D&D player, and most of the games I've played are the big names. I played a lot of White Wolf, but tons of D&D. So as far as, like, I often get out of my depth on this, but we talk about others and other experiences. Though I'm rectifying that, I've been diving into Hero System a lot lately. But as far as the topic goes, maybe when you're saying good at role playing, are we talking about pretty much every perspective, like be a better DM, or the way I took it was to be a player? When you're talking about how to be good at role playing, I think of that as like, I'm in the player's seat and I'm contributing to the game. And how do I do that in a way that is good. I think that's pretty universal. I think that's my strength. As I think that I've played enough games to where I'm pretty. I think that I'm most comfortable when I'm sitting down playing as a player, and because I think that when it comes to gaming, that's role playing games. That's kind of where I've spent most of my time, and I'm very comfortable with it. But as far as DMing a variety of systems, not so much.
Well, my original intention was to talk mostly from the player's perspective. On this podcast, we tend to lean a little too heavily on the GM's perspective on things, so I kind of wanted to do this topic and talk to players and how they can improve the game. And Kyle, a little bit ago, whenever we first started talking on the podcast, you had mentioned one thing that I feel is one of the more important things for being good at role playing. And you had mentioned like maybe they just don't have the competence to do it. The biggest barrier that I see, and this is for people who are brand new, but also for people who have been doing it for a while but just don't quite get into it, and that is that they feel embarrassed by it. Either they feel embarrassed by portraying a particular character in a certain way. They feel uncomfortable, even though we're sitting around very often with our friends and playing this game. There is a level of embarrassment that goes in playing somebody else, and that is one of the things that I have, like, whenever I try to role play, that's the thing I am most trying to defeat in myself, is that feeling of embarrassment.
That's a great point. And we've touched on this, I mean, my God, years ago on this podcast now. I can say years plural. But I think that is like the in the trinity of Creole cooking. You got your carrots, you got your onions, your onion, and you got your celery. And if you have like a foundational ingredient in role-playing games, it is playing someone else, becoming someone else. And so I say that ridiculous, horrible Creole accent sentence there because experienced role players and people who are completely new to the hobby alike, when you talk about becoming someone else, there is an embarrassment in wanting to do that. There is it's against our nature to feel like we're lying or we're being disingenuous, and so I find that when I describe this hobby to people who have never once played, they're like, "Oh, what are you doing in there on your computer? Why do you have these devil's dice?" And I'm like, "Well, it's like improv. You become someone else. You think like someone else for a while. You imagine what a different person would do given X situation or Y situation." And a lot of people will either go, "Oh, that sounds horrible," or, "Oh, that actually sounds really fun." And I think that it is a big hurdle to get over. And whether you've been doing this hobby for 20 years or you're brand new to it, I would love to eventually on this episode get into tips and tricks for how to become someone else. But we're not done talking about the act of becoming someone else. Eliot, what are your thoughts on this?
Man, boy, was I wildly wrong about this topic. I was excited to do it, and I thought we would run short. Oh my gosh, we're gonna talk about this forever, and I'm here for it. Before we go any deeper, though, I think we really do need to let's drill down a little bit, because when I think about this, I've seen so many faces in my mind flash of players exactly like what you're talking about, Clayton. People I role played with for years continuously, who you could probably write up on one page of paper words they've spoken. So before I jump forward and say, "Oh, that is the wrong way to play," and X, Y, and Z, this is how you don't be that way. I was thinking about it in my head, like when I think about what is a good role player, how to be good at role playing, I like to think of it as kind of like getting on a roller coaster and you have that minimum bar. Everybody's contribution in the game, I think, demands at least a minimum of participation in a lot of different ways before we can really say a particular type of playing is maybe not so good at role playing. Because obviously the first thing is, are you having fun? As an individual, when you're role playing, the single best indicator of whether or not you are doing a good job is, are you having fun? If you're having fun, then the conversation moves into, are you making it fun for others, or are you the opposite, making it less fun for the group? And then at that point we can say that's a bad role player, or that's something you should change. So does that make sense? I mean, did that spark anything?
I would say that having fun is not the bar to get on the ride, the roller coaster. I would say that having fun and of course not making the game unfun for others, that's the ticket to get in the damn park. Like, that is, yeah, like, if you can't even do that, get out, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing, because, like, you can't imagine these people who will be very quiet for a long running game but still show up every time. I mean, they're clearly having fun. So I think the real rub is, at what point does a player infringe upon another player's fun, and then maybe give tips in that direction. How don't do that.
Yeah, this is very important, and I'm going to rephrase it. I completely agree with you. You can not say a word in character the entire session, but you can still be having fun, and you can still be enhancing other people's fun. Role-playing is not doing a terrible Creole accent. Role-playing is not talking every single silence that happens to fall upon the group. Role-playing is playing a role, and if your role is, silent, that's okay. That's totally fine. But yeah, the bare minimum here about being a good role player is that what you're doing is A, fun for you, that's important, and B, you're not taking away from anyone else's fun. I don't care if you're like, oh, my character's an asshole, I'm just doing what my character would do. We've talked about that before too. But if that role, if your idea of role playing is ruining everyone else's fun because that's what my character would do, get out of the park. You're not welcome here.
And now we're hitting the meat. Clayton, is this going the direction you wanted to, or?
Absolutely.
I also get the impression too, like, from listening to you, it's funny you should say that, because just confirm or deny my interpretation of what you said, Clayton, is that we're also need to speak to another group, which is, it sounds as if you're a player, or you imagine yourself as a player in your mind, of a sit back and wait kind of guy, and you kind of maybe, I get the impression from what you said that you feel like you don't feel comfortable pushing out into the group and role-playing, either just role-playing in general, being your character, being in character, or putting on accents, or however far that goes. And that's so fascinating to me, because when I ran my Strahd campaign for over a year, you were just by far the most competent at that in the group. I mean, I think the de facto leader fell on Jordan's shoulders, but as far as role-playing a character and getting into it and enhancing the fun of everybody at the table, that was your role in my game. And that, I mean, it was one of the critical elements in the game, because your character was so cool, and you brought the accent, and you always kind of came in at the right moment with your point of view. So it's weird for me to hear you say that. So, so you're saying, so am I understanding that right, that is something you struggle to do, and you have to you really want to be better at it, but you have to put some work into it?
Every single time I speak during a session, it is a force of will to get me to actually participate in what is going on. And I know that for some of you who have heard me and have played with me for a long time, that may be a surprise to hear, but yes, it is that hard for me.
Wow.
The way that I have worked myself around that mental block of mine is I have chosen a metagame role for myself. And that metagame role is I will always try to pull other people into the game when I participate.
Well, that's a really good rule of thumb.
So whenever I try to, whenever it comes my turn, or I feel like it's my turn to participate in what's going on in the game, I try as hard as I can not to interact with the DM. I try to interact with the other players as much as humanly possible. That is my contribution to the game. That comes from me being the game master in a lot of the games that I play in. So whenever I am a player, I still have that game master mentality of I need to make sure that everybody at the table is having fun. And so that is where most of my characters come from. I always try to have at least one other player at the table who I am going to be playing off of whenever I get into my character and whenever I role play.
Let's just call that pro tip number 1. Like,
pro tip number 1. Clayton, put the jingle here right now. Put the pro tip jingle.
The what?
The pro tip jingle that you guys have developed, right?
He's like, thanks for making 2 hours of extra work for me.
That is a great pro tip number 1. I love that.
Don't talk to the DM. Talk to other players.
Ignore the DM. The DM is not worth your time. No, that's not true either. No, I love that. That's really good. And I think that there's a clarification there needed that I kind of touched on before, where interacting with other players and role-playing doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go and talk to those other players. Again, if you are someone who really wants to roleplay but is afraid to do a character voice, or afraid to even, like, speak that much, in a game, you can roleplay a quiet type character, and your way of interacting with the other players and not the DM might be to say, the DM says you have some downtime, you're in a village, what's everyone doing? You don't have to, walk up to another player character and put on some goofy accent. You could just say, my character walks over to so-and-so, sits down next to them and just, or near them, and pulls out a whetstone and just starts to, sharpen their weapons. That's something a silent but team-oriented character might do. You can think about things like that will bring you into another player's, like, oh, that PC is near mine. Now they're in my, radar. Now I might do something to interact with them. Does that make sense?
Oh, man, totally. And, like, that's 2 things you both just said are, like, you put a pin on something that I've either feel like I do and don't know about it, and that is try to talk to the other players. And secondly, you just touched on a super helpful thing. If you're a quiet player and you know that about yourself and that's where you get your fun, ways that you can help other people have fun, like I'm a very extroverted player typically, and it drives me absolutely insane to the point of it affecting my fun when a quiet player is so quiet that you just completely lose track of where they are. So just doing them the little favor of doing exactly what KP just said. My character's sharpening a whetstone in front of the inn or sitting at a table. Just giving a little drop of this is where my character is and this is what he's doing. And you can use the out of character voice, but just making sure that other players know where you are, because there's nothing more frustrating than either being in a dungeon. It usually happens in a dungeon. Or in a town or whatever, whenever a quiet character is so quiet that the DM goes, so KP, where were you? Like, what location were you at? And then that player's like, well, I would be where they're at. And picks the most interesting place to be in at that time. If that happens to you, I will be glad to say you're not doing it right. That's a clue. Don't do that.
Yeah, I get really self-conscious when a DM says, "What were you doing again?" Or another one, and this, for our DMs who are listening, even though we said this would be a player centric episode, I can't think of a better way to do this. But if a DM says either that, or they say something like, "Hey KP, I haven't heard from you in a while. What are you up to?" I'm extremely aware that when a DM says that to me, I haven't been doing something. I'm not going to say doing it right, but I haven't been playing to the best of my abilities. And it's been happening to me a lot recently. I'm in a couple of games right now, but I've been in kind of an RPG hole. I haven't been really feeling myself and role playing and generally playing this hobby much, sadly. And so it sucks to hear that. And this is not an episode about how to get player engagement from shy players as a DM. That's a different topic. And so going back to the player's view of it, yeah, if you're hearing that all the time, don't get self-conscious about it. Don't get down on yourself. But try to be aware that you can say simple things like my character is standing beside the paladin, trying to just. You wouldn't be protecting a paladin. This is a terrible example. My character is standing beside so and so, looking around, weapon in hand, looking to protect them. That's a way to silently role play out if you're like a protective type character.
I'll tell you what, the majority of times where I'm put in that position where the DM asks me, okay, and where is your character? Most of the time that question gets asked to me and I suddenly realize, oh shit, my attention has slipped from the game and I don't actually know where my character is.
Fair, and that, hey, look, we're in it. Like, I think the game we're in together right now is a good example. That that is going to happen to everybody. I don't care how extroverted you are. In a game with lots of players, everybody's trying to not dominate too much, so it's going to happen to everybody.
And Kyle, you hit upon in your description exactly what I try to do whenever I realize I've done that. You described the character as protecting another character. I try to, like, if I'm put on the spot like that, I grab another character and I try to make it sound like I'm doing something active with them. So, like, your description of, I'm looking after this character who's, like, I've got my sword ready and looking to protect this other character in case anything comes up behind us or something like that. So I'm basically making a real world bluff that I've been paying attention this whole time. I've just been active in the back where I haven't been particularly noticed.
I think there's nothing wrong with that. I also think that it's an unfortunate side effect of digital role playing, role playing over Discord or whatever. My attention does not slip as much when I'm in a room at a table with my friends, playing D&D or whatever we're playing. But I think there's nothing wrong with that bluff and the critical parts of that there. Pro tip number 2, play the jingle, is that you are, even though you're kind of covering your ass, you're bringing another player in to cover your ass with you. One hand on your cheek, and then they have a hand on your other ass cheek. And if your character is not the protective type, another example I thought of is, I'm in this room in the dungeon with so-and-so, and my character has been crouched along the corner where the floor meets the wall, walking around the room looking for, like abandoned bits of jewelry or, small runes that have fallen off of the mosaic tiled fucking thing in the room. I don't know, like, if you're like a sneaky self-interested type, you can say that you've been just looking at the ground, looking for cool stuff that has slipped between the cracks, but also you're in a room with another player. So if they want to, they could be like, oh, well, what, have you found anything? Or, dude, stop that. Stop. What are you doing? You're being weird. Like, they can choose to interact with you. You're leaving yourself open to be interacted with. I think that's the best way to phrase that.
Yeah, another thing that I do to kind of cover whenever my attention is slipped and it makes me come across as a better role player, depending on the setting, if it's like a fantasy setting, I will say, well, I'm looking to see if there are any secret doors nearby, or if it's a modern setting or futuristic, do I notice any cameras around? Because those are the types of things that I have noticed players forgetting to ask about. And it is one of my go-to things now for when my attention slips. It gets me into the game because I am asking for more information, and maybe my attention slip will actually yield more information for the group as a whole.
See, that's awesome. Let's pull back a little bit, because we've hit on this theme of like a lot of times players kind of get lost in the sauce whenever they get bored. And I mean you're right, it's easier to be engaged in person, but I have 100% been the DM who's calling this guy out and the guy getting called out about just not paying any attention, because this is a collaborative game. You're sharing the spotlight. So to kind of drive at a point here, I get bored. I think that what happens when you get bored is one of two things, at least in my experience. Either the party as a whole has developed a habit of relying too much on the DM monologuing, or maybe that DM is a monologuer. I'm kind of a monologuer as a DM. But also when there is a log jam in the game. Because anytime you have collaboration, you're going to have a difficulty resolving a decision point. So if you're in a dungeon, it's easy, but it happens all the time. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? We going to go left? We going to go right? We going to stay the night? We're going to make camp here? We're going to keep pushing on. There's so many times in a game whenever the group has to come to a consensus that it can be a moment of disagreement, and people can disagree over the most minute bullshit. And I find myself and I'm not going to say this is a good sign of role-playing. I think it is, but it's not because I think it makes the game better. It makes my fun more engaging. That's a cue to me to start getting involved. When I try to jump out and role-play, a lot of times it's to try to push through something that's boring me, or to contribute some. So and I don't know if this is making any sense to you guys, but I think that when you have too many people that are kind of the passive sit back player types, it can cause a slowdown in the role play, which leads to that boredom. And if you're trying to be more assertive, those are the moments I think it's best to interject with a purpose of trying to help the party break the log jam. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the log jam that you're talking about is a major cause of a lot of the problems I have with role-playing. I love being in situations where it feels like I am interacting with the other player characters in order to make meaningful decisions. I fucking hate being in a situation where I'm interacting with the other player characters in order to make decisions that don't fucking matter.
Absolutely.
Do we go left or right? Who freaking cares? Let's create a standard operating procedure so that as we go through this dungeon, we follow this standard operating procedure until something that is outside of the norm happens, so that we can interact with that. I don't care whether we go left or right. I care when something interesting happens, and having a left-right decision is not interesting.
Exactly. And reading the room at that moment, because in the game that we're playing now, original D&D that Jordan's running, that's the one I'm playing, that's the only game I'm playing now, and I'm playing with both of you guys, is that the very original system tries to solve that by designating roles, and like there's a caller who is the official read the party and tell the DM what to do. But even then, there's inevitably it's going to take somebody, a player preferably. And the way I try to deal with that is I try to use that as a time for me to role play my character. I don't want to just be pushy and be out of character, though. I don't know. You guys tell me. Sometimes I feel like I come across that way because I get so impatient and frustrated whenever a conversation I think goes too long over something that doesn't matter. That I will almost always push my character in to try to break it. And I will try to use my character, and that's whenever I will think about my character. I won't do it in like a, oh, this passive character I have is now all of a sudden going to try to be the group leader. It's just, I might do it as a, make a distraction, or maybe my character is absent-minded. I'll just start walking some way or something like that.
Yeah, when this logjam thing comes around, and and no one is making a decision, but also no one is role-playing. No one is, like, I would be fine if people were sitting around doing nothing to, forward the plot at this moment, but just acting in character with other PCs. Like, oh, my character grabs a piece of straw and, like, flicks the ear behind this person to make him think it's a spider, and then that person gets mad and shoves them. Like, that all seems really mundane probably to some people, but I'd rather have that kind of silly, just PC to PC mundane role-playing happening than this logjam situation where no one's doing anything, no one's really saying anything. Because not only do I get, frustrated or bored or whatever in those moments, but I don't want to roleplay. If no one is doing anything in character, it, to me, you've all met me, my God, I get embarrassed to speak up in character and walk up and use my voice and say something and do something. I can't quite put my finger on why, but it feels... It triggers my remarkably difficult to trigger sense of embarrassment in that moment. No one's doing anything, so I'm not going to put on my other character hat and do something. And it's difficult to break that, and so I really like it when those mundane decisions don't need to be done, left or right in a dungeon. You don't have to roleplay that out. But when the DM describes something that you see after you choose left or right, and there's some discussion to be had about this thing you've seen, this strange piece of machinery or something, that could be in character. That should be in character, because when people start to fall away from roleplay, and it just turns into this sort of checklist of, okay, what's next, it just completely checks me out of the game.
In that very specific situation you just described, the thing that gets me, and it sounds like it's what gets you, is when you are the only person who is role-playing. That is where the embarrassment comes. Whenever you are the only person who is doing something and you're met with silence, or you're met with other people not engaging in the role-playing. They're only talking out of character, and they are talking entirely logistical in the particular situation. Like if when we were in our game and we came across a room full of trolls, or a couple of trolls, which this was on a previous episode. I left that conversation in, but like in that situation, I want to have that in character discussion. I don't care if anybody else is actually using a funny voice or an accent for their character, but I absolutely want everybody to be in character. I want the words that are being spoken to be in character whenever we encounter that. If it's just a conversation about tactics, it completely loses me. I want to have those types of conversations in character, and I don't want another log jam where we just get into a big long discussion of well, I think this is the most optimal way of going about this situation. Well, I think this is the most optimal way of doing this situation. And then you go round and around and around until Eliot runs around the corner.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
This has been in my mind for a while, and this is a good segue. It's not a change of topic, but it's a good time to bring it up. I think that there is a cutoff point where a discussion of tactics, or I like the way you phrased it, Clayton, the most optimal way to do something. There's a cutoff point where that is not role-playing, and where that could be role-playing. You don't have to do a funny voice, we keep saying that. You don't have to even speak necessarily, but you can be tactical. You can go about exercising the mechanics of this game that we play, and you can role play as you do that. You can do something that isn't quite as optimal because that's what your character would do. You can role play through the actions and the dice that you roll, and you can role play by manipulating the mechanics of the system. And then you can also bore people to death with non-role playing discussions of optimal scenarios and tactical strategies and things that just make my eyes glaze over.
Oh, and the pendulum swings in both ways too, because you can. I'm very much like you, Clayton. I want every discussion to be in character, if possible, because that's why I'm at the table. That's what separates role-playing games from video games, puzzles, board games.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But on the other hand, the pendulum, if anything, I'm the opposite of you guys. I've never heard a voice that I've loved as much as my own. And so when I feel like I get self-conscious when I am at a table with a lot of people. Some are role-playing, but maybe most aren't. Most of the dialogue is happening out of character. It's all very crunchy system talk. Well, I start to get self-conscious whenever I insist on being in character, and it can sometimes be at the detriment of the party. Now, on the other hand, the extreme, I think, is that personality type who doesn't really care. Like, the last thing I want to do is go into an inn and the bard say, well, I'm going to sing a song and try to get money. And then the next thing you know, I'm spending the next 5 minutes listening to another player break out their guitar and literally sing the song, because that's how much prepared they are for the roleplay experience. But you know what I mean? Like, those people who insist on dominating the game with their own particular characters monologuing in character because they just think they're so brilliant. You know what I mean? That's the other side of that. That is also not the thing to do.
I try to hold by a rule whenever I'm in a game where I am allowed to talk out of character to the DM. Everything else that I say and everything that I describe my character doing, those are all in character. And that is how I roleplay. That is how I try to better the game, because the thing that I hate most whenever I'm the DM, but also whenever I'm the player, is whenever we are in a situation and somebody says something off the cuff and the DM asks, did you just say that in character? Oh, no, I never said anything like that. That kills it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe it was just the tone that the original DMs and culture of the groups I played with at the beginning, but that was very much the rule. It's like, if you're speaking it at the table and you don't qualify it with, hey, my DMs would, like, you just said that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, especially if it hurt the party or if it was not a good thing. That was the way that my old school DMs would, like, I mean, that was very frowned upon. Like, you're supposed to always be in character. And that's just not something that's true in a lot of games I've played lately.
Yeah, if your characters are standing around in front of an NPC and they suddenly start talking shit about him, you're goddamn right that's going to be all done in character. If you didn't say anything to step away, so your character is being the asshole by talking shit to this guy right in front of him, and you've got to deal with the fallout of that.
Ooh, can we talk about another tension real quick? Not to interject, but it's something I've got written down. That you guys would spark me to. I want to not neglect. Is I think a big tension between quote unquote playing your character and what pulls a lot of people out of the role play is that just as much we hate it whenever like that kind of stuff happens. There's nothing worse in being in a group of players and your character, like say for instance, my character is very stupid. I'm playing a low-end character. And since that's a very familiar role for me, being a stupid person, stupid people make mistakes and they come to wrong conclusions. And when your character, and you rationalize it to yourself that your character would latch on to an idea that out of character you probably think is probably not good for the party, when do you draw that line between I'm just playing my character, man, versus you know what, this may be what this character does, but it's going to lower the total aggregate fun of everyone, so I'm not going to do that. How do you guys walk that line?
I'm a big advocate of talking about that type of thing out of game before it becomes an issue. Like if I'm going to play a character who is stupid and or impulsive, I let the other players know that, and I want to get their feedback if they think that that's going to be a problem for the game. I don't want to ever be in the situation where players are mad at me and my only defense is, but that's what my character would do. If that is the situation, I have failed as a player, and also the group has kind of failed because this should be something that should have been resolved before it became an issue. But sometimes it does come up as an issue, and I don't think that's what my character would do is a strong enough answer in and of itself.
Correct. I think this is an interesting time to bring up an idea I had. You can play assholes, and you can play annoying people or nincompoops, just absolute morons. And you can do it in a way that still allows you to play that character, but not be annoying. Simply saying, that's what my character would do, is not enough. But letting people know when you're creating your character, hey, this is the kind of character I'm thinking of making. And then as the game progresses, like checking in and being earnest about it and being like, all right, guys, I know that thing I did there was like whack or annoying. I just want to see how you guys are feeling about this, and either people are going to be like, no, dude, like, yeah, it was annoying as shit, but it's hilarious. Like, I love this annoying character you're playing. Or they're hopefully going to tell the truth and be like, actually, yeah, no, it's kind of like dampening my fun. Maybe we could find a way to work together on this. It's not that other people should be dictating what you're doing and how you're doing it. It is that you should be courteous about the things you're doing by checking in with other people and seeing how it's affecting the real human being at the table or on the other side of the video camera from you. People might go on some big power trip about, my will is the ultimate will. I will play the way I choose to play. I am some kind of ubermensch when it comes to role-playing games. But no, you need to check in with the other people engaged in this collective fantasy with you.
If you're saying to your DM, can we have a private conversation? You're doing it wrong. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but that's the perfect example of that kind of player. Like, I've played in so many games where a person gets so into their own character that their character works at odds against the other players, and they have such a defined vision of what their character wants that isn't necessarily a group goal, that they're constantly demanding private time away from the table or something like that.
Yeah, it's the frequency. It's the frequency of private time, not
exactly.
the act in and of itself. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it is appropriate from time to time, but in our modern day, text messages and things like that, back in the day, it had to happen. But even back in the day, just write a note, bro. Write a note and give it to your DM.
Those types of characters can work sometimes. But if you're the type of player who realizes that every single one of your characters are doing that, then I feel like it's an issue that you as a player are bringing to the table, that you are playing this group game, but you're constantly wanting to get into a one-on-one conversation, private conversation with the DM.
I mean, maybe I'm the hardliner among the three of us. I personally think I'm racking my brain going back and back and back. I can't think of a single instance where I wasn't pissed off as a player when that happened to me. I really don't think it's ever permissible for a player to request a side conversation. Even if it's in the best interest of the party, even if that character has some secret solution to some big problem in the game, It's like, this is not a one-person game. This is not a single-person video game. This is a bunch of adults giving their hard-earned time off to play in a game together. So I personally I can't think of an instance where it's ever, like, maybe it'll happen once or twice ever, but man, I really think that's just a big turnoff.
There are a couple of clear instances where it's okay for me. I think if you're playing a game where the players and DM have all agreed that this could be a backstabby experience, a classic vampire game where you're all working together but you also hate each other. I think if you want to, say, hey, DM, I want to figure something out. I need to have a private conversation with you so I can ask you out of character, hey, I want to do this thing. How do I do this thing? Because in that circumstance, the DM will help you find out how to do the thing. And then, when you do the thing, it will be more fun for the other players because they haven't just heard out of character your entire plan to do the thing. I think that's an okay circumstance.
Yeah, you're probably right. I could see that.
And I think it could also be... and the operative point there, the key point, is that it is more fun for others when the thing you're doing pops off within the game world. And mind you, they have a chance to roll perception and see what you're doing. They have a chance to read your mind if they can do that. I don't know. But they discover it in game method, not by just hearing you vocalize your plan out of character, because that's less fun. And I think the other circumstance I can think of off the top of my head would be if you're playing a character that has some kind of like an embarrassing or like a negative habit. Like, let's say I've played a character that was addicted to Air Force grade amphetamines, and so if you have like a drug problem and you want to have the DM, like you want to be like, hey, my character wants to go off and do a score, I have to go meet my dealer, and I'd like to do that privately. I think that's okay, but the DM should tell you in that instance, that's fine, but I'm going to give other players the chance to do a perception check and see you slink away. And then if those other players happen to roll successfully and catch you, then you and the DM and the player that caught you, then you guys have to figure out a way to make this work in character. It's not a private video game. It's not some kind of cam show. This is a collective fantasy. And I think that second scenario could work.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of does, like you made a good point. It goes back to the game initially and how it was set up, because even in D&D, 5th edition, they give you a flaw, and so there are going to be maybe things you don't want to broadcast to the other players, and that inherently makes the game more difficult to be collaborative. So I think that a lot of the tone that your DM sets to can increase or decrease the frequency of that kind of happening. Can I pull away a little bit and focus on another thing I don't want to miss?
Go right ahead. One
thing I think that I found counterintuitive, but we were shooting the shit after the last game, and I noticed this came up with another player, was that I think something that gets in the way of fun role play and like causes players to play behind their character a little bit is they just love their character too much. And when I say that is they're like, players are so fearful that they're going to lose a character that they almost, that like, if you're so concerned about whether or not your character is going to survive this session and you start to play, it'll cause you to play super conservative with that character. I think that at least, what do you guys think? I think that oftentimes will discourage someone from just generally role playing, because oftentimes it's in the mix of an in-character role play that there are a lot of it can spawn some unintended consequences, and that's happened to players enough that I think the default to being out of character and using the out of character voice is simply a way to protect their character. And to me, I lose a lot of characters in general, and I don't know, I just think that it's better to remember that you can always make a new character, bro. Like this character is great, but I mean, I think you have to be willing a little bit to throw your character in the garbage can, and that if you have that feeling, then you're going to be more likely to just play off the cuff, be in character, and enjoy the role play.
This is not a problem that is unique to role-playing games. It is probably the most consistent advice I have seen just for creative writing of characters in general, is do not be afraid to kill your darlings. It's a problem that everybody who is creative and creates characters for whatever reason runs into, is that they just get too attached to the particular character, that they don't want anything bad to happen to them. But bad stuff is where drama lies.
Yeah, exactly.
I have played games that have swung very far to either end of this spectrum we're touching on here. I've played games where people care is not the right word, but are concerned so little with their character's well-being that it stymies roleplay. It makes roleplay almost impossible, because you're just essentially you're playing like a series of NPCs in a real-time strategy game, like they're gonna die. And I don't like that. And I've also played the far other end of the spectrum, where people like their darlings so much that there are zero stakes. You know that you cannot die even if you try. There's these people want to have just a like slice of life sitcom where at the beginning of every episode things have reset back to the same party that you've had the whole game. And I'm not saying that there are groups, obviously, that don't have fun on far either end of that spectrum. If your group loves that, great, as long as everyone likes it. But I think that both of those sides of the spectrum stifle roleplay. They make it impossible. You know, it's like that episode of Twilight Zone where the guy dies and he thinks he's gone to heaven because he's winning at gambling all the time. He gets in an alley fight and you know, he kicks the shit out of this guy. He gets all the women he wants, and then he gets bored with it and he's like, oh god, finally, spoiler alert, he's in hell. Satan. But yeah, it sucks. Don't do either end of those. Unless your whole group really likes it, I guess.
I guess you're kind of describing that like murder hobo kind of group that just seems to just want to... I mean, I've definitely played in games when a bunch of role players just decide to fuck with the DM, and they just decide those games can be very lively, but I see your point. I think I was just more... I think I was describing the middle road. The middle road for sure.
Oh yeah, no. I was sorry. I was taking it to an extreme.
Yeah,
you were not describing something extreme. No, go ahead.
System makes a big. The system can definitely discourage or encourage the impulse one way or the other too. I think there's something to be said about whether it's true or not. The idea that 5th edition creates a bunch of like invulnerable PCs. I think that kind of encourages roleplay, though, because it gives this sense of safety, you know, to a certain extent.
Death is not the only bad consequence that can come from a series of decisions, though, and both players and a lot of DMs also need to keep that in mind, that, like, death is not the only bad thing that happens or could happen. There are fates far worse than death, and there are very, very interesting things that do not involve death or harm. Just the complexity of human interaction can provide all of the drama that a person needs. There are so many TV shows where it's not a fight for survival at every point. Like, I love a lot of movies that are just very character focused and dealing, like a character dealing with the ramifications of their decision and just how it impacts the people around them and how they then view that character. That's the type of role-playing stuff that I love and I crave, and I try to bring it into every character that I play. The last thing that I want whenever I'm playing a character is a character who doesn't have an effect on the world and the world doesn't have an effect on them. I want to always have my character be the culmination of everything that has come before, to where I can draw a line and say, this is how this sequence of events have affected him, and this is how he has affected the world.
In my experience too, I think that the success or failure, or a DM can do a lot to encourage or discourage that type of risk taking on the table. And I think about it in my professional life. Everybody's, I'm sure, who works has heard about the praise sandwich. And there's nothing worse than your boss approaching you and start leading in with a, "Hey, you did such a good job with this," because you know that's going to be followed up with something bad. But I do think a DM needs to be aware of how, because anybody who's DM'd has had that moment when the players have done something you think is stupid. They didn't pick up on an obvious clue, or they went so far off the reservation of good choices that you just can't help but want to punish them, or they end up, their choices, the logic, in your mind, the logical conclusion of their choices leads to them punishing themselves with a bad outcome. And that's inevitable. But I definitely feel like the DM gets to choose to what extent they either can attribute the player's failures to just the players, or is it a shared thing between the DM and the players. So I think the DM definitely, for like your characters like you, Clayton, I don't like it when all I get is like fruit and like candy from my DM. I'm totally fine with a DM punishing me for a bad choice, especially if I was doing it in character and know it was probably not a good outcome, but that's what my character would do. That makes sense. But if that's all that ever happens, that also discourages roleplay.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eliot. There's a game that I'm in right now, and I know the DM listens to this, so she's going to hear it. But my character, literally in an act of it's what my character would do, did something very stupid. I picked up a mining charge, kind of like a large claymore, imagine, and I knew that it only projected out force and fire to one side. You know, it literally did have like a this side towards enemy kind of a thing, a kind of a mechanic. And I walked up to this horrible, unstoppable killing machine that was destroying my ship. It's a sci-fi game, and I pushed the mining charge up against it and detonated it with my character on the I'm air quoting here, safe side, but like still, I knew that it might have killed me. I was actually expecting it to probably blow off a limb or worse. And actually, I came out of it pretty unscathed. It's not that experience has made me feel like I'm invincible, but it is. I'm losing my point here. I think as a DM, don't be afraid. Yeah, don't be afraid to punish acts of stupidity. And to be fair, my character, I would have probably died if it weren't for some good rolls on the part of our medical characters. So in a way, I suppose I was punished, but it just so happened that they all rolled insanely high, and so I'm cool. Plus, I got a 6 scar out of it.
I think one thing that a player can do in that particular type of situation, because I've been in situations where, God damn it, the best solution is something that it would be very stupid for my character to do, or it is quite literally a Hail Mary that I am doing, fully expecting my character to die. Is if I'm getting ready to do something like that, I level with the DM and say, hey, I recognize this is probably going to be something very terrible for my character, and I, as a player, am ready for it. So go ahead and give me the full onslaught of the consequences of my actions. But here I go, and then I say what the terrible idea is going to be.
Yeah, this is an interesting related point, and another DM note to our DMs who have decided to keep listening to this episode. I think that the power is in the DM's hands there to punish a stupid act or to make, at the very least, realistic consequences for a stupid act. But ultimately, if you, the DM, decide that was awesome, or that was worthy, or that was just something that I loved that it happened, I don't want to kill this player. I don't want to make them re-roll a new character. Kill the player. I don't want to kill this character, I mean. The DM, you have the power to, in a sense, punish creatively, but also reward an interesting act by not making that player roll a new character. And I think that is a way for the DM to, in a meta sense, subtly reward good role-playing, even if the act was a stupid act that does have dire consequences. Does that make sense?
On the player side of it too, there's another aspect to this that I'm certainly guilty of, and I wish I could shout his name out, but he's a player, and you'll discover this on Monday, Clayton. There's a character, player in the game that we played chose to walk away from their character and make a new one. That they didn't die or whatever. He just things happened in the game. And it kind of what brought up that whole thing about praise, like giving unintended consequences. I mean, his character found out that he was put in a tough position to make a call, and he made it in the previous session. And then we showed up to our destination, and then essentially just got totally reamed out for making that decision, even though the decision was, hey, I'm not going to force the party to die here because we're going to go charging into an unwinnable situation. And so he was like, look, this character's a military guy, and he just got kicked out of the military. I just don't see a path to play this character. That's wise. I'm not that guy. If I find myself disliking my own character, and this is not not necessarily a bad quality, but it's definitely not a good one either, is I find myself just throwing him in danger. And perfect example is the character that just died. Is I didn't really particularly enjoy playing him. I made it, thought it would be cool, turned out to not be my cup of tea. So it's like every situation that I got myself in, role-playing or not, I would just go towards danger. And if you're that type of personality, you're playing with fire, because in a sense, if you find yourself playing that way, you should probably consider to do what our other friend did and just walk away. Don't be afraid. Once again, don't fall in love with your characters, and also don't feel obligated to play a character you don't like. Just walk away from it, because if you just find yourself throwing your character around because you don't like the character, that's going to put your other players in danger, right?
Right, and it's also, I think, slightly disrespectful to the DM. The DM, if they don't know that you're having a bad time with a character that you've made, and you're all of a sudden doing dangerous things, I think that the DM could read that as, oh, this person either is becoming a murder hobo, or this person is not having fun, and so they're like, they're testing me, or they're doing ridiculous things on purpose. And I think that it is also exactly disrespectful to your fellow players, because you're making danger for them too. And that's Eliot, I've done that. I have absolutely unconsciously realized, oh shit, I'm doing that. And I think that's a really good thing to bring up and to realize. And if you're doing that, yeah, you have a decision to make. Either you walk away from that character and make someone new, or you maybe have that character go through some kind of life-changing thing that alters them and makes them more fun for you, but that's also really difficult to sort of force. It's not an easy situation.
Yeah, and I've seen it happen enough times that, like, both as a DM and also I've been in the situation as a player, and I've also been in games where other players have done it. Like, this is absolutely one of those times where the player should say, what would my character do? Because for some reason, it is every player's first impulse to just have their character get killed off. Very, very few people in the real world are just like, they decide they're unhappy in their career and decide to commit suicide. Because that's essentially what we're talking about. So I really strongly encourage that if you are feeling that way, think about it from what your character would do and if they would just change careers, because that's a good story too. There is a movie called Ronin that came out in the mid-1990s. I'm going to spoil a movie that came out in the mid-90s, okay? So in this movie, Sean Bean plays a character in this. And his character is only in probably the first half of the movie.
Shocker.
His character does not die.
What?
His character in this movie realizes he is in way over his head, and he leaves the situation. He's basically kicked out of the group, and we never hear from him again. His character essentially just lives out the rest of his life.
That's a very minor spoiler for a very good movie. Y'all should watch it.
Be more like that. That is a very valid way to be in a very dangerous situation, and it absolutely fucking works in this movie for a character actor who is notorious for having all of his characters get killed. This guy just walks off screen and is never heard from again, and it totally makes sense within the story.
So let's sum that up as not even a pro tip, number whatever. That's like average role player competent level tip, which is don't play like, this goes off of liking or disliking your character, but also when you're role playing or thinking about what your character would do, don't be two-dimensional. And this is something I fall into really badly when I play martial class characters, is, if you're playing a tank, we'll call them, in whatever system it may be, not every situation has to be the nail that you hammer with your sword or gun. And I mean, if you, like you were saying, real world comparisons, Clayton, is that the last person in the world who's going to rush into danger with overconfidence is going to be like a Navy SEAL or a Marine or anyone in the military, because your life's on the line. They're the most cautious people on the planet, I would imagine, because they know how easy it is to just get a bullet in the head from somebody you can't see. So, assuming that just because you're a martial character that you should just go up and hit the bad guy. I mean, my character that died, that's what I did. Hey, there's a troll that's way beyond my ability. Fuck it, let's go fight it. That's a bad decision. And someone who's an experienced warrior wouldn't make that decision. Just because your character's a thief doesn't mean that when you get an audience with the king, you try to steal his crown. You don't have to just see every situation through the lens of your highest stat. That's not just what sums your character up. That's why typically I love playing characters that have terrible stats, because it limits me.
Yeah, I want to do an entire episode just on actually the nuts and bolts of creating your own personal character. And we're starting to get long in this episode, but there is one final point that I want to make sure I go over for this episode. And this is my advice on making a compelling game and being better at role-playing in this group game that we play. And that is, don't set out to fight other player characters, but do find ways to disagree with them. There's a very specific distinction I want to make here, because I've seen a lot of players who think that the way they introduce drama into their interaction with the other player characters is to start fights with them, like physical fights with them, to have issues that are completely irreconcilable between them, that they just hammer on every single time that it comes up, and it's something that comes up very often. This is the most stale thing that I have encountered in role-playing games, because I've seen it so many times and I've gotten so sick of it. But to have things where you can disagree with other player characters and both the players know this is not something that is worth our characters fighting and potentially killing each other over. To come up with things like that really increases the role-playing at the table. But you've got to recognize that there is a fine line, that having these types of disagreements are not things that should be done at every single opportunity. It's like a spice that you throw in occasionally just to enhance the situation.
Yeah, it's like cumin. You don't want to over cumin a dish. It's going to taste like Taco Bell.
Yeah, I've. The fastest way to spoil my fun is for one player to use intimidation or just kind of like, have one of those grab my sword moments in a conflict between players. It's like, oh, geez. Oh, great. Your character's. Okay, cool. So we're really going to throw hands over this? Like, okay. Like, that's your knee jerk? Okay, sorry. I guess I won't ever talk again.
Yeah, there's a lot I'd love to get into about the. And I'll have to think of how to do it without sounding like a bit part actor trying to charge $500 a head for an acting seminar in a Holiday Inn conference room, but ways to actually get into the head of your character and do things realistically. Realistically, not every disagreement between two professionals who are working a job together results in someone throwing hands. Realistically, someone who is, we've already covered all this, but you're not going to rush in and commit suicide because you don't like your job. Maybe we'll do another episode, Clayton. We can get into some of these fun details like making and playing inside the head of a character or something.
Absolutely.
Can I touch on? I know it's super long, but just can we give 5 more minutes to one topic I've not checked off that I think comes up in every game that'll be useful, and talk about voices just real quick. This came up earlier. Whether or not to use voices. Here's just my opinion, my 2 cents. If you really think about it, why do players use voices in game? Well, A, to add to the immersion, but levity. A lot of people shy away from using voices or whatever because I don't know how to use it. I'm not an actor or whatever, but that's kind of the only point I'm trying to make is that the game is always more fun when people laugh. And if you're attempting to put on a voice and you're not able to do it very well, that's going to be fun. That's going to bring laughter. That's going to help you get into the character psychologically. It's going to help you compartmentalize that character because you know when you're in and out of character. Other players know when you're in and out of character, and it's helpful for that way. And, just be okay. I'm currently trying to do a voice for a character, and it goes all over the place. Sometimes he's Irish, sometimes he's Scottish, sometimes he's American, sometimes he's Australian. But at least I think the players know when I'm my character. And it's almost always fun for me. It's almost always funny for other people. And I don't know. I think that's a really easy way to get into a character, is try to do something with your voice, be it an accent or a pitch or both, and it's fun. And who cares what other people think if it's embarrassing? Me personally, it doesn't embarrass me at all. Like that doesn't that when you guys were talking about that never crosses my mind. I never get embarrassed at a table because who gives a shit? It's a game.
Yeah, damn straight. Don't be embarrassed about doing that altered voice. And here's a really simple tip. If you're afraid or embarrassed or just inexperienced, speed up or slow down the way you speak. You could use your normal voice, but if you slow it down, I've now applied personality to myself. Or if you talk really fast, that's totally fine too. You could be like, oh my god, here I am talking, oh my god, my character talks this all the time. I'm running my mouth all the time, I'm constantly doing this. And again, that's still an alteration, but it's not like you have to be really good at accents. And I think that having that simple switch on, switch off, switch on, switch off, it makes you aware, oh, I'm role-playing now. I've turned the switch on, I've changed my voice, and it helps other players to know exactly, it helps them to know when you are role-playing versus speaking out of character at the very least.
Yeah, 2 thumbs up to voices.
Absolutely. All right, let's end on that very positive note and go on to geek things. I've only got one geek thing this week. A video that was released at the very tail end of December on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel called Pack Tactics. I don't remember if I've done them as my geek things before, but there's a normally the Pack Tactics channel talks about optimizing D&D. They go into the minutia of proving through math and probability which character builds are and are not optimized. But this particular video is how to optimize at any D&D 5e table. This video is a little different in that it, at one point, uses math to explain why having a fun character is better than playing a, quote, optimized character. So that is going to be my Geek Things recommendation for this week.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I have a thing. It's a Netflix series. It's 3 seasons long, and it just ended because it was designed to end. It was, it wasn't canceled. It was just naturally ended. And it's okay. It's pretty decent. It's the Lost in Space series on Netflix. Not the greatest that I've ever watched, but I do think worth watching. And it incorporates I'm going to say about as hard of sci-fi as average viewers want to watch. It's fairly realistic, but not to the point where someone who doesn't like hard science fiction would get bored. And it's kind of family leaning. It's definitely designed for all ages watching, but that isn't a detriment to it. And it becomes a little bit ridiculous how often this happens at times, but the general vibe of the show is we have entered a dangerous scenario, and we're going to use fairly realistic science to get out of the scenario. And a really good thing about the show is that every single main character, and they're a family. It's the Robinsons from the old school 60s or whatever, Lost in Space. But every single character has purpose, value, and talent, and it's really nice to see a show have a team, work like that. So, yeah, I would recommend it. It's not, I guess I'll give it a solid 6.8 out of 10, maybe even a whole 7.
Someone else recommended that to me the other day. I watched one episode when it first came out, and I didn't really give it much of a chance. I have to go back and give it a second shot. I like that it ended in 3 seasons.
Yeah, it doesn't, it's not one of those shows that drags on forever. I admit I was a bit of a captive audience. My parents were watching it when I was visiting over the past couple of holidays. And so I was kind of stuck at first, but then I legitimately did start to enjoy it. I'd say about a third of the way through season 1.
Well, not too far off from that, my geek thing is also a Netflix movie. I felt kind of weird. I even asked permission to use this one because I feel like it's kind of big right now. A lot of people are watching it. It's been number 1 or number 2 on Netflix for a long time, but man, it's just so good. Yeah, a lot of people hate it. I watched it going in blind. Absolutely made me laugh the whole time, made me cry, made me think deep thoughts about my life. But not to spoil anything, but it really, you can tell that it was made during the pandemic, and it was reacting to the things that are nearest and dearest to my heart. It's kind of a allegory about climate change and our inability that seems to come along with doing anything about it. And also the way that culture just in generally lost its mind during the current pandemic and still kind of hasn't recovered. And it does that with humor and levity, and it has excellent characters. It has just, from Leonardo DiCaprio to Jonah Hill to Meryl Streep. Just you can't name all the great people in this movie, and every single one of them bring it to the screen. No bad performances. Great. Everyone should see it. Everyone should see it, whether you like it or not. And then the fact that critics are extremely divided on it. It's one of those movies that has a very poor critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but a fairly high approval, even though it paints probably half the people in our country in a very negative light. It still manages to have almost 80% positive reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. But anywho, go see it. I loved it. I've watched it 20 times, I bet.
Maybe I completely missed it, but did you ever say the title of it?
Yeah, it's called Don't Look Up. The movie's called Don't Look Up, for sure.
Is it a spoiler to say what it's about? I know it's a space-oriented. I know what it's about personally, but I don't know if it's a spoiler to say it on the podcast.
No, I don't think so. It's about, the premise that you find out in the first 5 minutes of the movie is that We discover a comet bigger than Mount Everest, bigger than the dinosaur killer, and we discover that it's on a collision course to Earth, and that we have 6 months to do something about it. And hilarity ensues.
Cool. I watched the first 10 minutes of it, and then my parents decided they didn't want to watch it, but it's on my list. I'd like to check that out.
All right, guys. What do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Thanks for having me back.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.